Here we go. We're going to tie to homework 3 on this first day of spring. At least that's when it's being recorded, obviously not when you're viewing it, or perhaps you will. Rather than go the South Park route of Mr. Mackey saying, drugs are bad, okay, I think we need to add a little more to it and go beyond it. So homework 3 is going to be the vehicle through which we explore this idea, and what's going to be included. And notice this is written as prose, not bullet points, right? But I want to make sure that you get all the points. We talk the summary of drug use, class of drug, and its intended effects. And then you would describe the potential for abuse, the neurotransmitters affected, the brain regions affected, the user experience. What are the desired effects? But then there's often side effects beyond the desired effects, right? And then the addiction effects. So these are all topics for you to discuss and explore. And note, this is going to require some independent research. So one of the first places I would start is with either the OSU library or Google, and start building the paper, build your answers to your questions from there. Current research and potential uses, you can take a look at that, and your prediction about use, availability, and legality over the next 20 years. So let's keep it at that. You know, I grew up, I graduated from high school in 1975, and I remember people saying, oh my God, you know, in the 1970s, weed will be legal in a year or two. And it was like 1975, right? And still to this day, we have the majority of states where it, in fact, is not legal. So that prediction didn't hold up too well, right? So I'm interested in your predictions. Now, the possible drug choices for this, and I'm giving you a list. Obviously, if you want to add something different, or you'd like to take on a different one, please do. But let me know. Just run it past me so we can see how it goes. Penelope. Hi, sweetie. You came up to say hello to everybody. Her favorite thing to do in the house is to record these videos. So thank you for this, Penelope. Oh, this light should come down here a little more. What do you think, huh? You think that's pretty good? Okay. So alcohol, obviously kind of the most widely used drug, right? Cannabis, psilocybin, peyote, mescaline, ayahuasca, DMT, LSD, methamphetamine, Adderall, etc. And those are all in the same family. Those are all the stimulant class, right? Phenobarbital, Seconal, Quaalude. These are drugs that are going out of favor. They had high potential for abuse and addiction. And barbiturates was the class, basically. And these were sleeping pills back in the day. Ketamine and phencyclidine. Okay, and ketamine's been popular over the last couple of years. Phencyclidine is also known as PCP or angel dust. Not so popular, thank God, on that one. There's a family of ecstasy, MDMA, Molly, MDA. Maybe those are the choice, and those are common rave drugs, right? Xanax, Valium as drugs for calming one down. Opiates, morphine, heroin, OxyContin, that whole family of opiates, right? Sugar. And you say, oh, what? I thought we were going to talk about drugs. Well, I think sugar is a drug, at least in a loose definition of the term. People ingest it to change their state, right? Not only is it a sweetener, but you know, we've talked about a sugar high. And the fascinating thing about sugar, especially like corn syrup or those kind of unnatural sugars, if you go back 100, 200, 300 years, these didn't exist. Or the only people who were really eating sugar with any frequency were very wealthy people. So yeah, you know, I see one missing from the list right now. What's missing from the list? I don't see nicotine on there, so you can include that as well as one of your possible choices. So call that another, if you will. Let's talk about the drug classes then. Psychoactive drugs. What are we talking? Well, you know, people will group these into categories. Notice the boundaries can be somewhat fuzzy, and maybe we'll explore a couple of those as we move through here. But hallucinogens, opiates, depressants, and stimulants are the broad classes, if you will. Now, part of this is really about, and because this is a psychology course, how do these drugs affect the brain? So let's talk about the parts of a neuron, and you guys should be pretty well up on this, so I won't belabor it. And we've, you know, also this is part of your reading. We have the cell body, and that's job is to keep cells alive among many other aspects. The dendrites receive messages, and the axon sends messages. So what really is a neuron when you get right down to it? a neuron is a communication device, and that's what it does all day long. That's what it does 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. For the life of that neuron, it receives signals and it sends signals. That really is it. Now, where it's located in the body, the type of neuron, the type of activation that it requires, and its specific job, I mean, there's myriad functions, so let's not get too mired in that. Not really for 1100 honors is that necessary. But at the heart of the issue here is the synaptic transmission. And neurotransmitters cross the synaptic gap, right? And the key and lock, so there's a specific fit for many neurotransmitters within the dendrite and the axon, right? And neurons can serve to excite or inhibit the synapse to increase the flow of information or decrease the flow of information, if you want to use that paradigm. So it really is about this space, and remember, 100 billion neurons, and the whole thing is just incredible when you really think about it. Over 100 billion neurons, right? And what do? They communicate with each other. That's their job, and none of them actually touch each other. They have to have space between them so they don't have electrical crosstalk. And that's the job of the neurotransmitters, is to send the message from one neuron to another. It's a chemical message, right? So, and this is something we'll explore. Now, 7 example neurotransmitters, and there's plenty more, right? But some of the big hitters would be dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, GABA, glutamine, and endorphins. Now, there certainly are more, right? But let's take one at a time and just kind of get familiar with them to a certain extent. I see awesome destructive potential back there. I'm not sure what's going on. Dopamine, okay, what does it do? Well, it produces sensations of pleasure and reward, and it's used by the central nervous system in voluntary movements. So the transmission of dopamine facilitates feelings and behaviors, and that's really the story of what neurons do. Neurons are us, essentially. So they pleasure and reward, and this is then going to be important when we talk about operant conditioning. That is, how does operant conditioning work? Well, it really, when you reduce it, it's coming back to dopamine that creates a sensation of pleasure and reward that we'd like to return to, hence the operant power of rewards for increasing the likelihood of recommitting behavior. So, but it also then allows voluntary movement. So many neurotransmitters don't have a single function but have multiple functions, right? Now what we see then is the normal function, but the problem with imbalance then might be schizophrenia or Parkinson's disease. And these are where something goes haywire with the system. It doesn't function as it should anymore. And in this case, we might see the symptoms, the positive symptoms of schizophrenia, right? Like hallucinations, like delusions, maybe paranoia. Or we might see negative symptoms of schizophrenia, which is a loss of function, right? Where we might see a person lose their ability to speak, right? Or their ability to experience emotion. And so either negative or positive symptoms are could be the result of imbalance of dopamine within schizophrenia. Now, Parkinson's disease we see as a horrible disease, right, that causes muscular disorders, tremors, etc. And this is where we see inability to move properly. Famous people who have succumbed to Parkinson's. Well, many people might offer Michael J. Fox as a more current one, but one of my childhood heroes, Cassius Clay, or Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest boxers of all time, has and one of the greatest speakers of all time, if you will, suffered severely with his ability to speak and his ability to move as the result of his Parkinson's. Okay. Now, substances that affect, and this is where it gets kind of strange and kind of core idea within our mission here with this lecturette and this assignment, is that people intentionally ingest drugs to alter their neurotransmitters. neurotransmitter balances. Now, they don't say, well, you know, I'm going to take this drug so that my dopamine levels go whack or whatever. I mean, most people don't pin it down to that level. They say, I'm going to take this drug to increase my pleasure under these circumstances, right? Because I take the drug because it feels good. But the feels good is the effect of ingesting the drug on the dopamine balance. So I think it's humorous, it's kind of crazy, it's kind of sad, all these things together when you think that people invest so much time and energy in manipulating their neurotransmitter balances. Drugs are one way to do that. Now there are other ways to do that as well, but that's not really our focus. So, what happens, let's say, when someone takes cocaine or amphetamines, Ritalin, alcohol, whatever, it's going to change the dopamine balance. Now, and in this case, increase the level of dopamine available within the system. There's no free lunch, though, because neurons are pretty clever. They have the potential to adjust. So as levels of neurotransmitters affected by other sources may fluctuate, one of the jobs of the neurons is to bring things back into balance and to maintain the balance. And neurons can do this to a small degree, but they can become overwhelmed and fail in their ability to rebalance. What do we see? A lack of dopamine can cause receptors to become more sensitive. So if we're suffering some kind of organic disorder that diminishes the availability of dopamine, the neurotransmitters have your back. I mean, the neurons have your back, and they're going to say, there's not enough of this neurotransmitter present. I'm going to make do with what I have. So basically, I'm waiting, and I'm going to make up some numbers here, for like 8 molecules of dopamine under normal circumstances. So I'm this neuron, and I got my dendrites here, and I'm saying, hey, I'm going to wait, and boom, there's 1, 2, 3. I get up to 8, and then that's going to make me fire as a neuron, send my electrical impulse through the neuron, and then release neurotransmitters in a daisy chain fashion to the next neuron. So my rule is I'm going to fire, that is, I'm going to activate, I'm going to go from negative to positive for that brief second as a neuron when I receive enough dopamine. But it's like, shit, there isn't much dopamine in the system. There really isn't enough, and I'm not firing as I should. So the neuron has the slight ability to become a little more sensitive and, let's say, maybe fire with a little less dopamine stimulus. But on the other hand, right, an abundance of dopamine can desensitize the neurons. That is, they make an adjustment. Oh my God, there's so much dopamine here. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to rewrite my firing rule. Not 8 molecules of dopamine, but I think I'll wait to fire until about 12, right? And I know I'm oversimplifying this, but that really is just simply the process of sensitization or desensitization. Now think about this. If we take this a step further, you can see how this might then allow our systems to develop tolerance to drugs. So someone's taking cocaine, they take a whole bunch of cocaine, and the dopamine's everywhere, and the neurons are just overwhelmed, and they're going, oh my God, this is way too much, right? So the next time the user goes to take cocaine, that is, the neurons say, I remember this, and you know what, I'm going to kind of try and combat these effects to a certain extent. I'm not going to fire at the same level. I'm going to require more dopamine. So the user says, well, I got a solution for you. You don't want to fire, you don't want to get me as high as I want to get, then I'm just going to snort some more cocaine, all right? And I'm going to increase the level of dopamine, and that is try to undo this desensitization process. So we see how drug tolerance can be built kind of at a neural level. Now there's more to it, but obviously we're going to keep it simple. Now, what I want to show you here is this is the axon, and it's the tail end of the neuron, and it terminates, right, in this terminal button. Fancy name. The dendrite, this is another neuron here. Notice they don't touch. We have the space there because they can't touch. This is waiting to receive. This is going to send. I think the terminal button in the axon is an amazing biological device. Because let's face it, what does it do? Well, we have tyrosine, so I eat tyrosine, and my body uses tyrosine to make dopa, and from dopa it manufactures dopamine. So this is a manufacturing facility. It's manufacturing dopamine here, but what else is it doing? It's storing dopamine, so it's a warehouse. It will also send dopamine out when it's activated, when it's requested to do so, so it's a shipping department. But because we are efficient creatures, and there's a model of efficiency throughout the environment, we have a system that will reuptake dopamine that hasn't been used, which reuptaking, recycling if you will, is cheaper than manufacturing it, so we have the ability to do all of these. Close-up picture then, what happens? Let's say that our subject here takes some amphetamine, right? So they take some meth, they take some Adderall, they take some Ritalin. Yes, I hate to say it, but Adderall, Ritalin, meth, I mean, it's all the same class of drugs. So doctors prescribe Adderall to children, right? But the thing about meth is it makes people focus, and that's the key there. In small amounts. So the amphetamine increases the release of dopamine, and that's what explains the pleasurable experience to using these drugs as well, right? But notice, if someone snorts cocaine rather than take amphetamine, what it actually does is it blocks the reuptake. So cocaine interferes with the reuptake, but notice, either if we're releasing more dopamine as a result of amphetamine use, or we got the flip side, that is, someone's done cocaine and it blocks the reuptake, what it does is it allows for extra dopamine to be available within the system. And that's basically how that works. So stimulants can operate in different fashions depending on their relationship to the neuron and the neurotransmitter system. Either way, though, what we're talking about is excess dopamine. Now, an antipsychotic, let's say that we're talking someone whose system is out of balance and they're developing the symptoms of schizophrenia, they might be given an antipsychotic drug such as haloperidol. And what it does is it actually blocks the receptor. So there may be a surplus of dopamine as a result of the schizophrenia, but to diminish the symptoms then, this drug blocks the dopamine receptor and doesn't allow the dopamine to do what it would be normally doing, right? Now, tricyclic antidepressants, right, but what they'll do is block the reuptake. So these drugs are designed to operate at this kind of neural level. Questions about that? Okay. So we've seen quite a bit here, but you can see this system is what we're going to look at for all the drugs. It's either increasing the level of a neurotransmitter or decreasing the level, and it can do that by pushing more out, blocking reuptake, what have you. Let's try another one. Game. Let's try serotonin. Right? So what do we know about serotonin? Well, when it's functioning normally, serotonin is a busy neurotransmitter, right? It regulates sleep, dreaming, mood, pain, aggression, appetite, and sexual behavior. You say, oh my God, well, what doesn't serotonin do? And it's got a hand in an awful lot of functions. Now, problem with imbalance, what do we see if there's an imbalance of serotonin? We might see someone who's suffering clinical depression. Maybe certain anxiety disorders are implicated in serotonin imbalance. Right? Maybe obsessive compulsive disorder. So, substances that affect, well, Prozac, and Prozac was invented back in the day. That was going to take care of depression. There was a book written, Prozac Nation, and everyone was going to take Prozac, and the world is going to be wonderful as a result of that. Unfortunately, most drugs are really short-term symptom relievers rather than solutions to problems. There's no easy treatment for clinical depression. Drugs might be implicated, but cognitive behavioral therapy is likely to be superior to the drug alone. And notice most clinical trials, like for depression, other disorders, will include three groups. You got a placebo group, right? And then you do a drug-only group, and then there's usually a drug and therapy group. And guess what group always shows the best results? It's going to be the drug and therapy group, right? So, Prozac, we were all going to take Prozac, and it was going to diminish our depression. We were all going to feel wonderful, but the problem is some people reacted poorly to Prozac and, maybe murdered their spouse or whatever else, and people started backing off on Prozac as maybe causing as many problems as it solved. Or at least it was becoming dangerous enough that people were not going to prescribe it with the same vigor that they previously did. And the big problem is we generally don't know how these drugs work when it's all said and done. Now, hallucinogenics like LSD, right? What do we see? Well, we can see that under the placebo, let's look at these brain images. All right, sir. All right, sweetie, we look at these brain images and we see a small amount of activity, but when we see LSD, it's like the brain has lit up like a frickin' Christmas tree. And what's the story there? Well, let's talk about LSD here a little bit. It's non-toxic, right? So it's not a poison. It's not capable of killing someone chemically. Let's put it that way. It's non-addictive. It doesn't create a dependence, and it mimics serotonin in the brain. And this is a unique feature of some neurotransmitters and drugs to which they're related. The LSD will go right to a serotonin receptor and bind right in there just as well, if not better, than serotonin. And this can really play havoc with the brain. Because let's imagine now that someone takes LSD and there's an increased release of serotonin, but the LSD is floating around as well. Well, now all the serotonin slots and all the dendrites, right, are getting filled up. Boom, 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 quite readily, and this causes the effects of the drug as we experience them, right? So it prevents serotonin from sending the neural impulses in the brain in the expected way. Some people, kind of from a very simple point of view, call serotonin the gatekeeper, and that is it keeps the parts of the brain straight and in order and doesn't allow a lot of crosstalk. When someone takes LSD, then they might describe the experience of feeling music, right, or seeing music, and what they have is this kind of sensory crosstalk because the walls, the barriers between the brain areas have been altered as a result of the use of the LSD. Now that's a feature of the drug to some and as scary as hell to others, right? So tolerance in humans, mental tolerance to LSD substantially manifests in 24 hours after its first administration, right? And it reaches a maximum around the 4th day. Once established, tolerance can't be overcome. So it's a fascinating drug. People can take LSD and then hope to take it the next day and maybe a 3rd day. Might as well not bother because there'll be virtually no effects whatsoever, because the brain is so effective at developing the tolerance to LSD. Mental tolerance to LSD generalizes to psilocybin and mescaline as well, but not to tetrahydrocannabinol, cannabis, or amphetamine. So it's fascinating, and there's a lot to be learned about drug research. Part 2.